So let's talk about growth. Planners know that this is one of the most important and most challenging topics for any community to face. This is something that Clemson has experienced a lot of. How do we define growth? Well, at its simplest, growth happens when you have more people that want to live, work, shop, or visit your community than you've historically had. Growth is not inherently good or bad. Growth can be great for business, local entrepreneurs and storefront owners. Growth can also present lots of challenges in terms of, say, traffic congestion. So the key is to manage it and to plan for it and to prepare for it. Now, in order to get balance and get the community you want and to harness growth, you have to think really long and hard about what community you want moving forward. Because once we understand those things, we can start to use tools in the planning toolkit to start to work toward that. In this strategic plan, we're going to be talking about growth as it impacts inclusivity, place and quality of life, resiliency. These are things that we'll get into in much more detail. For this one, we really want to talk about growth. Why is it happening, and to what extent will it continue to occur in the future? So in order to understand present and future growth for your community, it's important to understand your history. This is a community that just a generation ago was a very small town. There's three major reasons for this. And the first one is its presence in the middle of what is called the Charlanta mega region. This is an area along the I-85 corridor with 22 million people that is projected to add 13 million people from 2010 to 2050. Its GDP is about $1 trillion, which by at least one measure makes it the 15th largest economy in the world. A second key factor is the presence of the University of Clemson itself, a flagship institution. This is a national trend in which major state flagship institutions have been growing at a really rapid rate. In fact, the total enrollment of the top 12 flagship public universities in the Southeast increased by 50,000 between 2010 and 2017. These 12 universities added over $1 billion in research expenditures over that same period of time. So these are major economic catalysts in the knowledge economy. A third factor is what we'll call the Greenville effect. Greenville has been an incredible success story. From 2010 to 2018, it added over 40,000 jobs. That's 18% employment growth, which is really remarkable. When we take a look at a map produced by the Regional Planning Organization, we can see development as it stood in 2015. But by 2040, under current growth patterns, it's anticipated that all the space between Clemson and Greenville is going to be built out. There'll be no farmland, no vacant space, if these two communities continue to grow in a low-density way. So Clemson has all the ingredients of a rapidly growing city. It's part of this growing super region. It has a flagship university. It's part of a rapidly growing metropolitan area. And what all of this points to is that growth is likely to continue for the foreseeable future and could even accelerate. And we gathered data from the university, the city, and a variety of other agencies to understand how many Clemson students will be added over the next 10 years, how many Clemson faculty and staff will be added, as well as non-student residents and non-Clemson jobs. What we determined is that the University of Clemson is going to add roughly another 7,000 students, 1,100 to 1,200 faculty and staff, 500 to 600 non-university based jobs. Regarding non-student residents, estimates vary widely from 1,000 households to 2,600 households. The important thing to keep in mind is that growth is projected to continue amongst all of these categories. Now, one of the most noticeable forms of growth, the one that's getting the most attention and is changing the physical makeup of the community, is upscale student housing. And it's very important to understand why this is, because it's occurring in university communities all over the country. When we look at the total number of beds that the university students require and the total supply, they're roughly in equilibrium. That would seem to indicate that there isn't a need for more student housing. But the reality is, it's the type of student housing that's in demand. And upscale student housing, which is growing all over the country, is very economically successful. And it enables developers and lenders to pay, in a place like Clemson, $3 million for an acre of land, whereas any other kind of developer can only pay approximately $500,000 per acre. So this can have a profound impact on a community and is on Clemson. Think of it this way. If there is demand for some amount of upscale student housing where developers can pay $3 million, most commercial property owners are going to wait to see if they get an offer from one of those developers. Each and every one of them knows that as long as there's demand for upscale and luxury student housing, they could get an offer of $3 million per acre for their land. And therefore, they're not going to sell it to other folks. So this is why student housing is so important in Clemson. It is inextricably linked with every other kind of land use development that this community is likely to want to see and need to see. Whether we're talking about affordable housing for service workers, workforce housing for school teachers and nurses, storefront retail for entrepreneurs, office and employment, all of these things are going to require student housing to be addressed in some manner before these other things happen. So as we said, there's going to be additional demand for 6,500 to 7,000 beds of student housing by 2030, but there is a spectrum. Roughly 1,900 to 2,300 of those beds will be upscale and luxury housing. The remainder will be mid-scale and upper mid-scale housing. There's different ways to evaluate these numbers, but the bottom line is there's going to be a lot more student housing development. One of the things that we're going to be doing as part of this process is looking at other university communities and look at what they're doing. As part of this study, we're benchmarking Clemson relative to a number of other university communities. One thing that jumps out right away is that Clemson's a relatively small community in terms of land area. Clemson grew at a rate of 10% since 2010, which puts it in line with a number of its peers. In terms of the total number of student beds, it has added a lot. It's added 5,500. What this clearly shows is that every university community in the South has experienced an influx of student housing development, although it has been more extreme in Clemson. So as you can see, Clemson is not alone by any means as it relates to student housing. Truly, all over the country, and especially where you have flagship universities, communities are trying to grapple with this issue. So we're going to look at some of the strategies that they employ. And the important takeaway for all of you in this is there are tools that you can get in place. Tools to explore include finding places to put density in the community and matching that with design regulations to make sure that the architecture is appropriate. It also involves providing the right regulations in terms of zoning to make sure that there are transitions between areas of high density and low density. Historic preservation is an important tool to maintain the community's character, whether it's a specific building or an entire neighborhood. There's a number of funding tools that could be explored to provide more workforce and affordable housing. And catalyst projects through public-private partnerships with developers can be an important way that communities can set a new standard for development. And so the real question right now for the City of Clemson is, how do you want to get out in front of this? What things do you want to put in place now? Because these are things that are going to shape growth and guide it for decades to come.